My name is Vanessa, my pronouns are she, her, and I blog about books on Instagram at mango.reads. For this project, I decided to read Wong May, who is a poet that is doggedly resistant to categorization and easy understanding. But I decided to read her because once I was in the reference library and being chased away because they had to sanitize, and I just cracked open one of her collections, and I remember just being instantly compelled by this controlled force in her poetry and just being commanded to bear witness. So Wong May was born in Chongqing, China in 1944. Her mother was also a poet who wrote in Chinese and the Tang classical style all her life. That's kind of important, so remember that. In 1950, they moved to Singapore, where Wong first encounters English and its poetry. She graduates with a degree in literature from the University of Singapore in 1965, after which she then moves to America in 1966 to join the Iowa's Writers' Workshop and graduates with her master's in 1968. She also publishes her first collection, A Bad Girl's Book of Animals, in 1969. Now, after another 2 collections, Reports and Superstitions, she then publishes absolutely nothing for almost 40 years, before being brought out of hiding by Zachary Schomburg in 2014 when she publishes Picasso's Tears. Now, what's really interesting about this is that her undergraduate writing coincides with the development of local writing in English at the time. So she was actually quite recognized by her contemporaries, included in Edwin Thumboo's 1973 book, 7 Poets, Singapore and Malaya, though now she's largely been forgotten. So the work of hers that I decided to read was A Bad Girl's Book of Animals, which she published around the age that I am now. Why did I choose it? Well, because what a title! I guess I was just really curious to meet this bad girl from the 1960s. One of the reasons why Wong may have been forgotten is that even back then, Thamboo notes how her poetry fell outside the general movement of writing and instead belonged to an intense inner life and kind of independent streak, ironically, that gave her work then and her work now very strong personality. So while other poets were experimenting with, melding all the different languages in their poetry, for Wong, English, and by extension America, were escapes from her mother and mother tongue. So about her mother, she says, "My mother always held me in her mouth, like a fiercely maternal animal." And it's about this mother that she wrote often, and to this mother that she dedicated all her collections. So the one in this one reads, "Dear Mama," in all caps, and it turns out to be the title of one of the poems, which should appear. So we begin this poem with this intimate address, and it turns out to be kind of like a farewell letter in 2 halves, each beginning with "by the same token." It's a poem of pairs, and the latter half always being a little bit longer, a little bit further apart. And this use of space is why Wong May's poems are best experienced visually. So we really see that this departure here is not just physical, it's also linguistic, it's artistic, right? The American free verse style being a stark contrast to the tight rigidity of Chinese classical poetry. And the image of the grafted green is also very interesting because it necessitates a source, it evokes inheritance, right? And also violent separation, and yet this kind of potential of growth that can unlock. On the other side of this intense desire for freedom, however, is loneliness. And that's the emotion that this collection centers on. The opening poem observes a young man alone in his apartment in another country on his 23rd birthday. And the opening line goes, "In his country, they use water hyacinths to feed pigs." So this is kind of a stream of consciousness, passing thought as he lies in bed, thinking about life, which is #relatable, but also, suggests that subconscious presence of home, because this is actually a common husbandry practice in Asia, but not exactly the first thing you would think about when you think of Asia, right? Unless you're from like a farming province or something. But already you get the sense that for Wong as an emigre writer, she just has this complete disregard for sentimentality and, the obvious cultural references. So there will be no dumplings, but there is the can of sardine that he gets up to eat. Processed, cold, slimy, typical young adult nutrition when there's no longer anyone to feed you a warm meal and fuss over you. So he then buries himself in bed, picking up on that living dying motif, and languishes in the ennui of solitude and dislocation, which is what Wong May have felt then in America by herself. So her poetic voice overall is very cool and composed and intelligent, right? But underneath there's this really deep, emotional, deeply human set of concerns. And I just think that her poetry for me was so complex and challenging, but only insofar as real humans are. So reading Wong May's poems is really reading her as a poet, as a person, and I think I just found her this transnational poet who frustrates our very Singaporean desire to, fit things into boxes and see things in binaries. And she just asserts this right to be an individual, to be opaque in a world that demands ease and access from women. And reading her, you just hope some of that spirit and drive just rubs off on you.